January has historically been a slow month for video games, so 2 of these games came out last year. But let's start with the actual new release, Momodora Moonlit Farewell, the 5th entry in the Momodora series, of which I've only played the previous entry, Reverie Under the Moonlight. Subtitles like a Tumblr user's D&D campaign name aside, I really enjoyed Momodora Heavily Under the Moonshine. It's a short and sweet Metroidvania game. Moonlit Farewell continues to impress with beautiful pixel art graphics showing off impressive set pieces. The combat is fun, and all attacks have the right visceral feel to them. The thing I appreciate about Metroidvanias, and indeed here in Moontit's Motel, is the contrast between the feel of your character at the start of the game and at the end. Once you get a few key upgrades, like the sprint, double jump, and wall jump, you're able to fly around the map like a madman, and it's fun. Momodora also has fun theming, both in set pieces and character design. There's less Dark Souls-inspired gothic architecture and more mystical fantasy wilderness. And while I did feel like the story interrupted things in ways that the previous game didn't, it's still great and it's a hearty recommendation from me. But that brings me to one nagging thought that kept popping up, and that was, man, I should really go back and replay Reverie Under the Moonlight. Which sounds like a positive, but hear me out. A sequel making me think of its previous entry means that it evokes the feelings of the original without surpassing them. It's like fucking your mattress while secretly thinking about the couch cushion. Previous game was more challenging, the status effects were more punishing, and the exploration felt more rewarding. The setting may have just been 2D Dark Souls, but guess what? I like Dark Souls. And while I'm sure that an objective critic should be comparing games in a vacuum, I'm not an objective critic. Nobody is. There's no such thing as an objective critic. We're all coming into these things with our own biases, and this is mine. But don't let that take away from the fact that Momodora Moonlit Farewell is a beautifully crafted game that clearly had a lot of love and effort poured into it and is well worth your time. Next up is Lethal Company, which I briefly went over in the end card of the best, worst, and blandest video, and I was going to wait until it got out of early access before giving it a hard motherfucking examination, but some games stay in early access for literal years, and I've already made 2 gameplay videos on it, so I might as well. Firstly, I'd like to establish the 2 types of survival horror games. There are the tense experiences that make you feel true fear, and there are the games meant to be screamed at for hilarious TikToks and YouTube shorts, Lethal Company operating in the latter camp. Which isn't to immediately dismiss it. It's not a game that I would ever seek out to play on my own time, but as a game night with friends, it certainly functions. But even then, it takes a while for it to function. I think the best demonstration of this was when I went to edit those 2 Lethal Company videos. The 12 minutes of footage for those 2 videos were pulled from 2 40-minute recordings. Only about a quarter of the time spent playing was actually interesting, and the other 30 minutes was spent wandering labyrinths that had no monsters, or getting killed immediately and being able to do nothing for 10 minutes, or hanging out in the ship, buying items, and picking on a moon to land. I know that there are more difficult moons that have more monsters and more interesting environments, but those cost money to go to. In-game money, I should add. And while I'm okay with spending our hard-earned cash to have fun in this video game that I am planning to have fun in, even if we end up losing everything in the process, my teammates usually aren't. We don't want to spend our money going to a moon with fun enemies that will take everything from us, so we end up going to moons where nothing happens before a failed parkour jump takes everything from us instead. Well, I'll never object to playing Lethal Company with my friends. There's a whole list of other games I'd rather play before Lethal Company. But I would like to put the developer on a pedestal for a moment. In an age where the big money studios are driving the industry towards an inevitable crash, and where players are constantly emptying their wallets because the name of a game, regardless of the quality, it's wonderful to see a solo developer outsell big AAA releases. Even though Lethal Company may not be my jam, any modern day auteur in this industry is worth celebrating. Right, here's the big one. 2023's Game of the Year to nobody's surprise besides the Spider-Man 2 fans who all emerged from the woods to announce that they've never heard of it after it won, Baldur's Gate 3. Dungeons & Dragons but in video game form. A game where you can roleplay as anyone and solve quests in virtually any way you can imagine, and the game is super flexible and plays for any and all types of players. Well, can I play as my actual D&D character, the Crimson Magician? No. Well, I won't be too harsh on the game for that. I figured the game wouldn't have the dialogue to portray a lunatic posing as a hero, and I figured correctly. So I decided to make Poppy from the Dream Team, and the game let me roleplay as her well enough for the most part, deceiving others for her own gain and playing support in combat. But I soon caught the foul whiff of moral choice in the air, and I instantly was forced to compromise my role-playing. You see, moral choice is another way of saying there's a good ending and a bad ending, which in turn is another way of saying one of these endings is satisfying and ties up all the character arcs, and the other will scold you for fucking things up. Which is fine, but my one playthrough is currently clocked in at 90 hours and I still haven't fucking finished it. If I'm going to pour 100 hours into this fucking thing, I'm going to get the ending that actually feels like an ending. And once my role-playing was compromised, there was no going back. Aside from the occasional extortion after helping someone out, I had to earnestly help people even when I should have told them to get bent. You didn't have to help them, meta. You can just tell them to get bent and move on. Listen here, clever tits. Skipping content isn't a fucking reward. Having the content change around your decisions is, but most of the quests past Act 1 don't. You either accept the quest and get to play more of this game that you paid money for, or you just ignore it and miss out on content. For all the hype about this game being a super flexible RPG, the only ways you can really play it are good, bad, really bad, or a jumbled mess of contradictions. Right, what else? The combat sucks. Anytime a failed skill check led to combat, I'd immediately reload a save, which killed whatever immersion was left, but it was either kill my immersion or kill my drive to keep playing. But now here comes the twist that really shouldn't be a twist, but people get so fucking defensive over their favorite games that I basically have to spell it out for them. I really enjoyed this game. I mean, fuck, I have 90 hours in the damn thing. That wouldn't happen if I disliked it. And while I hate the combat, it wasn't enough to push me away from all the elements I did like. Christ, first I complain about Momodora's story getting in the way of its gameplay, then I complain about Baldur's Gate's gameplay getting in the way of its story? Sorry, I swear I'm not that unpleasable. I just like a nice balance, and to have them flow seamlessly between each other. Now, if I had played it in time for last month's Best, Worst, and Blandest video, would it have been my game of the year? No. I loved Baldur's Gate 3, but I was expecting to love it. My actual game of the year, Cassette Beasts, was one that I expected to be bland and forgettable, but turned out to be the most invigorating gaming experience in recent memory. If I had to rearrange my top 5 list for 2023, I'd give Amnesia the Bunker the boot, and it would go to Remnant 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Hi-Fi Rush, Sea of Stars, and Cassette Beasts. Shortly before the monster from the bunker bit my head off for turning my back to it for 5 seconds.